Thank you, everybody, for joining Sonar Training 201 today. My name is Donnie Gilbert. I am a market expert here for FreightWaves. I've been in the transportation industry about 15 years. On and off, I've been on the asset side, I've been on the brokerage side, I've dispatched trucks. And for the last several years, I was in pricing, actually pricing loads off the spot market. So I can definitely say that I grew up in the spot market. I'd pick loads, price them that normally picked up same day. And if I was lucky, they picked up the next day. Today, we're going to go through some indices that I would have liked to have had or used back in these days that would have helped me out with booking loads, running loads, kind of know what's going on in the markets. We're going to look at some outbound and inbound tender volumes. We're going to look at our Headhaul Index. We're going to look at outbound tender rejection rates and inbound tender rejection rates. We'll break those down by dry van and reefer. And we'll also look at what we call the lane tender rejection rates. And that's kind of breaking down the tender rejection rates by the length of haul. Tender lead times, how long a truck's at a pickup or delivery. And we'll also look at wait times. Actually, let me back up there. Tender lead times is the distance between a load is booked versus when a load is picked up. And the wait time is how long a driver is sat at a pickup delivery on average per market. So, getting started here, I'm going to jump in here to my Sonar screen. And when you first open up Sonar, it goes to your dashboard here in your global pages. Understand that you cannot edit or change the information that's in the global pages. You can only do that under my pages. So I would click on a chart down here to get started. But before we get started, I kind of want to look at and show you this little button right here in the top right hand corner, this question mark with a circle around it. You click on that and scroll down to our knowledge center. This is some great information that everybody should always be using, helps learn what indices that we use in Sonar. So go down to here by indices by category and click on indices by category. And you will see all the different groups and then the indices that are listed under them that we go through. We got air cargo, some financial data that you can look in and kind of compare your company to the big guys, see how your OR compares to their or your net profit margins. We've got our DAT freight index, different demographics, energy price, energy volumes. And today we're going to get into these areas. Here's some airtime, but we're going to get into freight volumes with tender volumes and the head haul index. We also have tender market share. And if you scroll on down, we're going to get into this trucking supply and demand, some of these tender rejection rates, tender lead times. So you can click on these and definitely do. It gives a great description. We'll start off here with tender volumes. When you click on, it explains what it is, what our indice is, and some of these indices are very important. Whenever we're looking these up in charts, you need to know the indice that you're looking up. So for outbound tender volumes, you'll see an example here, OTVI, a period, and ABQ. The OTVI stands for Outbound Tender Volume Index. That's the index that we're looking up. We do a period. And then this last three letters, that's the airport code of the market that you're wanting to investigate. So keep that in mind. You can look all these indices up in our knowledge center. But when we get to a chart, we will see how this actually works. Um, Going back here to my Sonar, I've got a chart here already pulled up, but I'm going to start out by building a new page, and we're going to start with US maps. We can view this information on US maps. We can view it on a chart like you see here in front of me, and we can also build a tree map. So when I start off, I'm going to build a new page. I'm going to start down here by clicking Edit Pages. When this pops up right here above, you'll see in blue here, Add a Page. I'm going to name it Sonar 201 US map, and I'm going to add it. Now, when this first pops up, it's going to be blank. So the way we start with a new widget here is this little blue square with the plus sign in it. We'll click here, and I want to start out with a map. So I'm going to go down here to the map function. When this pulls up, you'll see the United States and all 135 markets listed out. And since I'm going to go over the trucking indices today, right here, 3 down, you'll see the little bitty truck here, cab. I want US markets. That's already selected. I'm going to turn my Core Plus settings on. I'm going to turn on my legend right down here, and I'm going to click for the map type that I want. And I'm going to go ahead and type it in outbound, spell it right, Bound, tender, and volumes. And that'll give me enough here where it brings up the outbound tender volume index. I will click that, and then I will click this little blue arrow to get rid of that section. And here we see the US map with several different colors on it. And what this is our outbound tender volumes is an index that was created on the 1st of March in 2018. We went ahead and set the index to 10,000. That's not the number of loads or the number of trucks. It's just an index that we created. And by choosing 10,000 on March 1st, it was a neutral market. It wasn't a very, very strong market. It wasn't a very, very weak market. It was a good neutral market that we chose 10,000 to be the index. And since then, of course, we've had tender volumes grow, we've had tender volumes shrink. So since then, it's been cut loose. Today, I believe we were in the 10,500 range. So this map right here, showing by the legend, we took the 10,000 index and we divided it out by the market share per each of these markets. And that's how we came up with the number of outbound tenders index for each market. So if we hover over, let's say Columbus, Ohio, you see the outbound is 237 index points. If you look over Ontario, California, it's 481 index points. Right here to the west of it is LAX, 327 index points. So you can see the sizes of the markets. Our outbound tender volume index by using the US maps is a quick way to get information to know where the volumes are shipping across the US. And here we got Salt Lake City, Denver, Houston, Texas right now show shipping heavy volumes. Atlanta, Harrisburg, and of course the Chicago and Joliet markets as well. So by looking at these markets, you can tell which ones by the shades of blue, how big they are and how much volumes they are shipping by the shade. You see a lot of them that are in white are 0 to 96.43, which are small to small, medium sized markets. So 30,000 foot elevation. When you want, if you're looking and you need to know an airport code, you can hover over a map like we can right here for Denver. And then, of course, it'll show you DEN, and then that's the X market. So that'll give you the airport code that we use when we're going to bring up charts and look at these numbers on an actual chart. Again, go down here to Houston. Houston was one of the ones that our IT guys actually used HOU for the airport code. There is an airport in Houston that is HOU, but I think we're all used to the IAH. But the other 134 markets use the proper airport code. Salt Lake City, SLC, 142 index points for outbound tender volumes. You can also bring this map up if you want to, and you can select and type in inbound tender volumes. Inbound tender, VOL, and you see the inbound tender volume index. You can select on inbound, and this tells us where the freight is going. So again, we see Ontario, California still has a lot of inbound freight. A lot of that's freight that's coming off the ports from LAX. We see a lot of our hub markets like Atlanta, Memphis, that these are receiving loads either by rail or by truck or by air cargo. And of course, these are the hubs that deliver to the surrounding markets. You see a lot of inbound freight into the Northeast. The Northeast is a dense market. There's a lot more freight coming into those markets than there are going out. And of course, you see the New Jersey, New York, and Boston markets shaded blue because you have a lot of inbound freight. So this tells you from a kind of a 30,000 elevation view of where our freight is actually going to. Florida shaded blue. There's a lot of inbound freight headed into Florida. And of course, we all know that there's not much outbound freight leaving the Florida markets. There's a large excess of capacity. This is our map view. What I really, really enjoy looking at, especially if you want to investigate a market, is looking at these numbers on a chart. And the charts are going to explain to us the trends and the changes in these markets. So again, I'm going to go ahead and build a new page right quick just for charts. I'm going to select the edit button and add a page. I'm going to put SONAR 201 chart as the title and click add. And once again, we're going to have a blank page pull up here. In the top right hand corner, we have the little plus sign in the blue square. And I'm going to drop down and select a chart. By using the indice code that I gave you, OTVI dot, and I'm going to use Atlanta. So I'm going to type OTVI, a period, and then ATL for the airport code. We see here in Atlanta how the tender volumes have gone up and down. Over here on my right hand side, this right here is the index volumes that you see. So Atlanta has 408 index points for their volumes. And down here on the bottom, we have our dates. So this map goes back to August 18th all the way through today. And I can change these dates. I can select a 1 year map or chart, and this goes back to all the way to last year. So I could actually look and see what tender volumes last year at this time were a little bit higher versus where they are today. And I see all the ups and downs. These big valleys that you see a lot of times correlate with holidays. This is Christmas and New Year's. We've got Memorial Day. We've got the 4th of July. We've got Labor Day. And you'll see, of course, a lot of these shippers will close throughout these holidays, and your outbound tender volumes will drop. You can compare. So I'm going to actually compare this to inbound tender volumes, which is ITVI dot and then ATL. By bringing that up here in the green line, before I do this, I'm actually going to go down and change my chart settings to large fonts. This will help me see the lines a little bit better and the numbers a little bit better. I always encourage everybody to use large fonts. And you can also change your display to a dual display. A dual display is when you're comparing two different indices. Here, these indices are the same, so I can use an absolute chart style, or I can click dual, and it's going to give me a y-axis on the left-hand side. And this left-hand side is also my index volume numbers, but it's for the inbound. And of course, my main chart title is here on the right. So we're looking at this and we're showing an outbound tender volume of 408, and we're showing an inbound of 443. So we have a lot more inbound coming into the Atlanta market than we do outbound. When we're looking at this type of information, we can see here as we zoom in, we can go to the last few days. We see where the outbound numbers have dropped from September 9th through the 13th. And the inbound has also declined, but not near as much as the outbound. Therefore, we've had an excess of capacity in the Atlanta market. We also measure this using our Headhaul Index. So I'm going to come back up here and just show you the Headhaul Index first in a chart style. It is using the indice HAUL, HAUL, and the airport code of ATL. So we see here what we just looked at. We see our Headhaul Index is negative 35.54. To show you how this is derived, I'm going to put OTVI.ATL. And I'm going to compare it to ITVI.ATL. And what we're looking at again is our outbound tender volumes, 408 in red. And if you take the 408 and you subtract the 443, you'll get negative 35.54. So this is the way that we measure capacity. There's a lot more trucks headed into the Atlanta market than there are loads that will take those trucks out of the Atlanta market. This does not measure deadhead. So it's always good to look at this on a US map view, so you can look at the surrounding markets and see what's going on with our Headhaul Index as well. So I'm going to pull back up and go to a US map. On our map selection, I'm going to go down here as this pulls up. I'm going to click our map style, scroll down, and we'll type in Headhaul. Headhaul Index. Now, this map's a little bit different. If you look down here at our legend, you see it starts in red to white to blue. The markets that are in white are negative 21 to a positive 21, which means they're about a neutral, a balanced market. As the Headhaul Index pulls up more into a backhaul style market, the negative number gets higher, and we shade the markets in a deeper red shade. So light red to deeper red, meaning we're growing in a backhaul market. On the opposite side, we have blue. As the Headhaul Index increases, the shades of blue will get darker. So this lets us know real quick from a elevation view of what markets have an excess of trucks and what markets have excess loads. And you can look here at the market like Memphis and see the surrounding markets. By looking at the surrounding markets, this will let us know if the markets are, possibly a balanced market or even shaded red, if trucks might be deadheading into that market. Now, Memphis being surrounded with Arkansas and Mississippi, these trucks are probably moving towards Memphis because there's a lot more freight in the Memphis market. A good example is Southern California. We see that Phoenix market is negative 92, so it's a very large backhaul market. And looking over and seeing that the Ontario is a positive 81 market, that means there's a lot more loads than trucks from the Ontario market. So naturally, you're going to have people from the Phoenix market and even Northern California up here where you see it's balanced or slightly shaded red, moving their trucks down to Southern California or over from the Phoenix market because they're chasing the freight. They want to go to areas where there are actually more loads than trucks so they can keep their trucks rolling. So that is our head haul map, and we've already looked at our head haul on a chart so that you can see the directions. It's very important when you're looking at these charts to really kind of zoom in and look at what's going on in the past 8 or 10 days as well to see which direction these are trending. So our Headhaul Index dropped, but here in the last few days, capacity has been getting tighter, but still at negative 35. There's a lot of excess capacity in this market. So its effects on rates would actually probably bring outbound rates down in this market. All right. So next we're going to look in and go to our tender rejection rates. Tender rejection rates are probably the very most important indice that we use that I believe because I was always, bidding loads in the spot market, bidding same day freight, or even pricing customers. I want to jump out here and go to our question mark again to our knowledge center. Click on indices by category and scroll down to our supply and demand for freight, truckload supply and demand, and I want to click on tender rejection index. I encourage everyone to go in and read this article if this is the only one that you do read. It explains what's going on, the overview of what it is, who's interested, and what it tells me. Tender rejection rates is how we measure a truck's willingness to pick up a load out of a market or deliver into a market, whether we're talking about outbound tender rejection rates or inbound tender rejection rates. And we measure that by the percentage of loads that are turned down. So if you have 97 loads that are accepted, 3 loads that are turned down, that's a total of 100, and 3 that are turned down, that would be a 3% tender rejection rate. So that's 97% of the loads were accepted in that market. We view the willingness to run by the 97 by saying it's a 3% tender rejection rate. And that's really, really important because that correlates very closely with what's going on in the spot markets relative to your contracted rates. As you scroll down, you'll see that we have a general OTRI, which is outbound tender rejection rate, which is all trailer types. And we have an ITRI, which is inbound tender rejection rate. Also, it's all trailer types, dry van, reefer, and flatbed. We break these down into dry van tender rejection rates, inbound and outbound. We break this down into reefer inbound tender rejection rates and outbound tender rejection rates. Flatbed, we break it down, but it's only on a national level. We do not break it down by market. And we also break tender rejection rates down by length of haul. Now, this length of haul is all trailer types, but we have inbound and outbound for a city haul, which is 0 to 100 miles. We have short haul, which is 100 miles to 250 miles. We have a mid haul, which is 251 miles to 450 miles. We have what we call a tweener length of haul, which is 450 miles to 800 miles from the pickup location. And we have long haul. Long haul are loads that are 800 miles plus. So this is very important when we're looking at tender rejection rates. I always look at the what's going on with OTRI, OTRI. I break it down by dry van and reefer, and then I get in and look at the length of hauls to see if something's different, where maybe the mid hauls might be have a higher tender rejection rate because of the location of the market, or if it's tweener haul. Tweener haul is very important. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But tweener haul is a key indicator that can kind of help us measure how strong a market is by the willingness of carriers to run loads that are between 450 and 800 miles. The 450 to 800 miles before ELDs was kind of that load they could pick up in 11, 12 in the morning and then, of course, deliver the next day. Now, since they've implemented the ELD rules, sometimes that might be a load that you may take a day and a half to run, but can't deliver for 2 days. So there's some inefficiencies in that lane. And the reason it's a key indicator is a lot of your drivers are going to accept other types of load, mid hauls or long hauls, or even short hauls before they accept this tweener haul load because they do not want that to be sitting somewhere idle on those loads. So you'll normally see a tweener haul load with a higher tender rejection rate for that lane. When we see those tender rejection rates drop on a tweener haul load, it could be because the market's very, very weak and they're just accepting what freight they can get because they don't have any other options. So optionality drives them towards accepting tweener haul loads. So let's kind of jump out here and look at these in Sonar. We'll start by looking at a map here. I'm going to kind of just jump in. We have outbound tender rejection rates that are type outbound tender. And we have, of course, we have intermodal. We got to kind of scroll through here and find. Let's take the outbound out. So here's the tweener outbound tender rejection rates that I was looking for. And as we see here, the index shows white to blues. And this is, of course, to lower the tender rejection rates. They're not negative. They're all positive numbers, or 0 is the lowest. And as the tender rejection rate builds up, they turn a darker shade of blue. Again, using the maps just kind of gives you a quick overview. I can look at this in the OTRI, which is just the general, all categories of trailer types. Here, I've actually chosen a lane type. Or I could even go in and type van and scroll down to van outbound tender rejection rate. This shows me the dry van tender rejection rates. A lot of the dry vans are shaded white because the dry van tender rejection rates are very low. The spot markets are very low. So you see a lot of white for dry van. Of course, as you see the darker shades of blues that they get up. And we can also go in and break this down by reefer. Scroll down here to reefer outbound. Reefer's been a little bit stronger this year for the markets, and you see right through here the blue in the middle. This is our what I call our poultry belt. A lot of chicken and turkey products are made from northern Arkansas all the way up through Iowa, and it requires a lot of reefer trailers. So reefers have been tight in these areas, so the tender rejection rates have drawn up into anywhere from 30 to 50%. So these are very, very strong markets. When we're talking tender rejection rates, about 0 to about 3%, I would say that the spot market is below the contracted rates in the market. From about 3% to 7%, I would say the spot market is about equal, maybe just above or just below your contracted rates. And over 7% shows the spot market moving above the contracted rates in that market. Once we get above 10%, when I start getting excited. That's when we know that they're really starting to pick up, and whether it be volumes increasing, capacity tighten up, tender rejection rates start to rise. It's really exciting when you see them over 10%. Let's jump into a chart right quick and let's see how our tender rejection rates correlate with the spot market. I'm going to look at OTRI.USA. And this is a national average of what's happened with our tender rejection rates. I'm going to click back to a 1-year period. You see last year, starting out in kind of October, they started dropping down, a few peaks for the holiday season. And then, of course, the big decline down through May and June and where we are today. I'm going to compare this to the long haul DAT average rates. DAT long haul van freight rates for the nation. So this is their average rate. And that's going to be in purple. I'm going to click this right here. I'm going to go ahead and full screen it. So we see the peaks and the valleys. In blue is our tender rejection rates on a national average, and in purple are the national DAT averages. And you can see how close they correlate. When our tender rejection rates are going up, you see the DAT rates are going up. And you do see some spaces in here, but understand I'm comparing a percentage to a rate per mile. But we use the outbound tender rejection rates, and as they start to increase, that lets us know what is going on with the spot markets in either a national level or those in a deeper into a market level. I want to kind of zoom in here and show you the last few days of this information. You see right here, this is our average rate per mile per DAT. It stops, and this stops on the 11th. And the reason that stops is because when they collect the information on loads that have already finaled. So a load is booked, a driver runs it. They get the bill signed and they send the paperwork in to their carrier. The carrier collects the data, enters the data, and then, of course, that information is collected by DAT and then published after they get a proper sample size. This could take a few days. So when you're using a rating tool, they can be 7 to 10 days behind the market for the reason it takes time to collect the proper information and the proper sample size to give a rate per mile for what they're doing and be credible. So you see that they're 7 to 10 days behind, and a lot can happen in those 7 to 10 days. So as we look at it here on the 11th, we've seen national tender rejection rates that were below 5% at about 4.75% jump up to just over 6%. So if you're bidding using a rating tool, you're bidding your freight right here. And since then, we've seen that market rates have increased. So this could possibly lead to you underbidding your freight. So it's very important when you're using a rating tool to check out our tender rejection rates for that market. If it were the opposite and the market had from the 11th had declined and had a downward trend, you could be overpricing that freight, and therefore you're not winning freight. If you can't win freight, you can't make money. So it's very important to maximize your revenues using this tool. You want to be able to increase your rates when when the spot markets are moving up, or you might need to decrease your rates if you see the spot markets moving down. A great example of spot markets moving down are, let's say it's January 2nd. It's just after the first of the year, your volumes drop, your rates are dropping, and that means your tender rejection rates also drop. If you're 7 days behind that, your rating tool is going to be showing you prices that are still in the fourth quarter around Christmas time, which could show you an extremely high price. You keep using that extremely high price, you're going to overbid your freight, and you're not going to win any of that freight. So this will help you out using for bidding. Let's dive in and look into a specific market. So I like bringing up tender volumes always first on a market. So I'm going to bring up Atlanta. And these are the tender volumes so we can see what's going on with the tender volumes. We're going to jump in and look at OTRI.ATL, which is the tender rejection rates for Atlanta for all different types of trailer types. We see here over the last few days, it's dropped down. Here we had the drop in volumes from the Labor Day holiday, and then leading up to an excess in capacity here, pushed tender rejection rates down. And they've just started to kind of build back here in the last few days. And they're still at 3.04%. So it's a relatively low tender rejection rate. which means the spot market rates probably are just below the contracted rates out of the Atlanta market. If I really want to break it down, I can compare it to the OTRI dot ATL. And these are going to be my drive and tender rejection rates here in red. And I'm also going to bring up ROTRI.ATL. These are my reefer tender rejection rates. And you can see they're quite different. So my drive in is actually 2.67. That means that there's a very, very low tender rejection rate currently in this market. It's been kind of flat here over the past week. So the market's not really moving up or down. And with a 2.67 tender rejection rate, it's very clear that the spot market rates in the Atlanta, Georgia market are lower than your contracted rates. So if you're catching your contracted rates for dry vans off the Atlanta market, you can probably flip them to the spot markets and get capacity and still make some pretty decent margins on these loads. Looking at our reefer tender rejection rates, we see here they've picked up to 8.49%. 8.49% would pretty much tell me that contracted rates are below spot market rates in the Atlanta market. And here over the last few days, you see they've kind of trended up and dropped back down a little bit, but they're still above what they were on the 11th. So here we see kind of an upward trend. And this would kind of tell me that I might need to or might want to increase my bids just a little bit for reefer loads. If I took a reefer load at a contracted rate and try to flip it to the spot market, there is a high probability that I would maybe lose money on that load, or I would need to understand I need to really push a carrier rate down to create a margin, because right now the carrier rates are a little bit higher than what the contractor rates are. So that's how we kind of look at the breakdown between drive in and reefer. We can also compare, let me go back and shut these down, our lane lengths. COTRI, again, that's our city haul, which is 0 to 100 miles. I'm going to bring up SOTRI.ATL. This is our loads that deliver between 100 and 250 miles from the Atlanta area. MOTRI, these are loads that deliver 250 to 450 miles from the Atlanta market. Tweener, TOTRI.ATL. The tender rejection rates for loads that deliver 450 to 800 miles. And last but not least, long haul, 800 miles plus. So we can see how over the past few days, these lanes have been fairly muted, but some of them are starting to pick up a little bit. We look at COTRI, it's 2%. A lot of your local loads, they're pretty well a flat rate when you're running the local loads, maybe $700, $750, $600. 2.11% tender rejection rates, below the contracted rates. Very, very weak market for your local loads. Again, looking at short haul, that's 100 miles to 250 miles. It's 3.79. So again, it's probably right at contracted, right below contracted rates. Your spot market is. And the same with your mid haul. Again, this looks like by these tender rejection rates, they're all fairly weak. Looking at your tweener haul, it is your highest resisted lane, but it's at 4.37%. So this kind of tells me, as a key indicator, that the Atlanta is a fairly weak market here when it comes to the spot market right now. It'd be a very tough market. So if I were bidding loads out of Atlanta, I'd be going to the spot market. It's probably below contracted rates or right at, and I would need to really work on pushing carrier rates down to create margins for loads that are outbound from the Atlanta market. You can also look at ITVI, and this is the inbound. So if we bring up Atlanta, I'm sorry, ITRI, I want to look at inbound tender rejections. And this lets us know the willingness of carriers to run loads into the Atlanta market. Here from the 8th going on to about current today, you've seen it picking up, which means they're resisting some of the loads that are headed into the Atlanta market. They're probably rejecting them and they're wanting a higher rate. So as we saw Atlanta being a fairly weak outbound market, that would make sense that drivers that are headed into this market would probably want a little bit of money. You can also use our SONAR to compare. We can look at ITRI.LAX. and it has a 3.28 tender rejection rate. Of course, LAX is where there's a lot of freight volumes right now, and it's also a long haul for many of these drivers on the East Coast. So our tender rejection rates for LAX are 3.28%. It's a very low tender rejection rate. It's been lower. It's just now climbed up to 3.28%. So this is something that you'd want to keep an eye on. You see it's trending upwards. You'd want to keep an eye, see if that continues to trend upwards. Maybe you can get a better rate headed out to the LA market. But this is how you look at it. You can compare market to market. You can compare information within markets. You can compare markets to tender rejection rates to volumes. But our sonar gives you a lot of options here when you look at our charts to see what's going on with changes in the markets and your trends. If we want to, we can also build a tree map here. Sonar tree map. I'm going to add a page here. I'm going to click the blue plus sign here and add a tree map. Got to name the tree map. We'll name it tree map. And I want to select our outbound tender rejection rates and really show you how this compares. When we bring up the information here, I can scroll down and I'm going to pick truckload supply and demand. I want outbound. Long haul, mid haul. Here, we'll look at outbound reefer tender rejection index right here. So this is going to be reefer specific. I'm going to click the X markets, which is all the markets. I'm going to click add, and you'll see it populate over here to the right. This is all the 135 reefer markets. I'm going to click done, and then I'm going to click save. Now, this reefer map is very interesting. It reads from the top left to the bottom right. Here are my largest markets for reefers for tender rejection rates. Down here in the bottom right are my lowest tender rejection rates for the reefer markets. The bigger the box, the higher the tender rejection rate. We look at it, we see the market name, we see the percent change from the last time this was documented, and we document tender rejection rates on a daily basis. So in the last 24-hour period, tender rejection rates have increased 7.6% in the Bismarck, North Dakota market. And that's also why it's shaded green. Green shows positive increases. This purplish, bluish color shows that it's kind of been fairly neutral. And the red colors show a decline. Down here below the percentage sign, this is the actual tender rejection rate. In Bismarck, North Dakota, 71% of the reefer tenders are being rejected. The number one reason that freight's rejected is because of higher spot market rates. So definitely in this market, for a reefer, if you have a reefer in Bismarck, North Dakota, compared towards the contracted rates, you should be getting a much better rate outbound from that market than what the normal contracted rates are right now. As we work our way down, they get smaller, and to the right, they get smaller. You can see here, we go down about the first 30% of the screen here, and then the middle section, again, 35% as we move over down to 12.10, and then all the way down here to Lakeland, Florida, which is our very smallest market. It has a 1.23% reefer tender rejection rate. So this map right here lets you quickly know which markets have the largest and which markets have the smallest tender rejection rates and how each of them line up compared to each other. A great map to use. Again, I use our U.S. market maps in the morning. I also bring up volumes and tender rejection rates on tree maps. And then as I choose a market I want to dive into, I'll look into our charts and figure out what is going on with all of the volumes versus tender rejection rates. I also look at tender lead times, and I also look at wait times. So I want to move on, and I look at tender lead times. I use mainly charts for tender lead times. You can create a tree map for tender lead times if you would like to. You can look at tender lead times on a U.S. map if you would like to. But mainly I'm going to show you here today, I'm going to go back to a chart and bring up the tender lead times for the Atlanta market. Tender lead times is the time again between when you book the load and when it actually picks up. So today is Wednesday. It's just after 4 o'clock. If I booked a load picking up on Friday at 4 o'clock, that is a 2-day tender lead time. So we'll bring up TLT as the indice, ATL for the Atlanta market. And we see here the ups and downs of tender lead time. And tender lead time can correlate very close. Again, it can be a key indicator of what is going on in a market. When shippers start seeing rates increase from carriers, they'll start expanding tender lead times. We've all been through a week where we have a very tough load picking up on Thursday. Your manager calls you over and said, hey, we're picking up a tough load on Thursday. It's Monday. Please work on it today. Get it booked by Tuesday. If we wait till Wednesday or Thursday morning, we're really going to pay a high carrier cost for that load. Your manager, in a sense, is extending the tender lead times, asking you to book it 3 to 4 days in advance versus 1 or 2 or same day. It's because you can get a better rate. So when you see tender lead times start to pick up, it's because shippers are seeing higher prices from their carriers. When you see tender lead time starts dipping back down, it could be because shippers are seeing the prices start to trend downward. So a great tool to kind of look at and use. If you see tender lead times get very, very low, like maybe 1.8 days, 1.5 days, that could be an indication that shippers are taking loads off of contracted carriers and they're moving them to the spot market to take advantage of low rates. And that's what we've seen a lot of here in the past several months, where shippers have not been giving carriers the proper contracted rates and moving their freight over to the spot market. Here for Atlanta, Georgia, we saw it drop down. Here just past the holiday, it picked back up to 2.35 days. I'm going to compare this to TLT.USA. I always like to look at the average, and the average for the US is 2.44 days. So Atlanta is just below the average, and the average kind of stays. You see, it picks up, through the holiday, the average picked up. But for the most part, the average tender lead time for the USA is between 2.4 and 2.6 days. So I can kind of tell what's going on. If I see a market where tender lead times have jumped up to from maybe 2.6 moving up to 3.0 days, and I see it trending upward, I'm definitely going to start watching my tender rejection rates and my volume to see what's going on with those markets. Are volumes increasing? Are inbound volumes increasing or decreasing? And how that affects the Headhaul Index. And that can also move in. Capacity will definitely affect the spot market rates, which we'll see through tender rejection rates. You can compare TLT to other markets as well. We can do TLT.MCI, Kansas City. And we see here in Kansas City, it's 2.69 days. It picked up there right before the holidays, as shippers, of course, carrier rates go up before holidays and the end of the month. So here, shippers probably saw higher carrier rates. They pushed their tender lead times out to fight their rising costs. And then just after the holidays, it came back down to where we are today at 2.69 days. And that's just a little bit above the national average. But we do see the trends that can help you pinpoint. If you see something in tender rejection rates that kind of make you wonder if rates are going up or down, pull up and use the tender lead times. This can definitely help you out. Moving on, keeping in the charts, I'm going to look at average wait times. And the index is wait, WAIT, dot, and then, of course, your airport code, ATL, and we use Atlanta again. Now, our wait time is trying to measure the drivers that are sitting at a shipper or a receiver. And how the average is in that market can kind of help identify the probabilities of your drivers getting held up in that market. Here, looking at the Atlanta market, this is a monthly index. So we measured at the end of each month the average. Here, back in June, around the 1st of June for the month of May, it looks like it was around 140 minutes. Now, normally detention starts after 2 hours, which is 120 minutes. Here we see it start at 140 minutes at the end of May, which had come down. And then we see it start climbing back up through June, July, and August, up to 171 minutes. If you're sending a driver into the Atlanta market to unload or even load, there's a higher probability that your driver might get into detention. So by seeing this, either one, you might want to up your rates because it's very difficult to collect detention. So if they want you to run into a market that you know your driver will possibly be detained, they could tell you to kind of up your rates a little bit, or it could also tell you to, hey, look, be sure and get your bill signed in and out because you want to be able to do the proper procedures to collect detention. So have your driver know in advance that you need to have the bill signed when you arrive and when they're loaded or unloaded, and have all the proper documentation first so that you can give it back to your customer and file detention charges properly. Like I say, detention is a very huge issue that's only getting worse, and it's also very difficult to collect those charges, which is very unfair to your drivers, especially with the new hours of service rules they're implementing. It can really cut back on their drive times and underutilize both your driver and the equipment. So that's what we've gone through today. I want to kind of recap. We've looked at volumes. Volumes tell us where the freight's at, or by looking at inbound volumes, where the freights are going. Volumes are very important for large carriers. You know, when it's important to keep your drivers moving, they need to keep those drivers headed into markets that have a lot of strong volumes. Or if you're pricing freight and you see that you're headed into a market that has very small volumes, and it may be 100 miles or so to a market with large volumes, you know that you might need to up your rate because you may have to deadhead your driver over to a different market to keep him rolling as well. Looking at tender rejection rates. Tender rejection rates, as I said, are very, very important. They correlate very closely with what's going on in a spot market relative to the contracted rates in those markets. Is the spot market moving up? Is it moving down? What's going on? And that can be, you know, looking at OTRI, it can be broken down into outbound van tender rejection rates, outbound reefer tender rejection rates, or it can be broken down by lane. So very important when you're digging in, look at whether it's a dry van or a reefer, and also the distances. Do you need to up that rate, or do you need to lower your rate using your rating tool by the trends and the changes that have gone on in the past 7 to 10 days? Tender lead times, another key indicator that you can watch to help understand are rates increasing or decreasing by what shippers are doing, how quickly or how soon they're booking their loads or how late they're booking their loads on the timing of them picking up. If they're expanding their loads, pushing tender lead times out to 3.5 days, they could be seeing rates in those markets actually start to pick up. So when you see tender lead times trend upwards, it could possibly mean that rates are picking up in that market. And when you see them trend downward, that could mean that rates are also trending downward. When you see tender lead times get extremely short, that could be an indicator that shippers are moving their freight over to the spot markets. And last but not least is wait time. How do we measure detention? Or if a driver markets that are possibly could get your driver detained. And we use it by using the wait times. And this will give you an average for the market to understand the probability of your drivers being held. Let us know if you have any questions, and we appreciate everybody tuning in today.